Hey everyone, it's 4mats4 here. If you guys have been perusing the Vortex forums lately, which they just released the new forums, and I have to say it looks pretty good, you may have noticed that I posted a new thread called the Factions Nostalgia Proposal thread. It's a very long thread, and it details a proposal I have for a new Factions game mode that kind of alters the way Factions is currently, so that it becomes more like classic Factions from a couple of years ago. It's a very long, very dense thread, I know, and I'm making this video here to kind of better explain and visualize sort of some of the things that I am talking about in the thread, because some people were a little confused or they just didn't feel like reading the thread, and videos are a better way of getting the information across that way. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to get into the thread. So yeah. Alright, so let's jump right into the biggest difference between Factions Nostalgia and current Factions, and that is the removal of dispensers, droppers, and water protection. The removal of water protection will greatly reduce raid times, and it'll be much harder to stop since you can't patch a hole in a wall and stop a raid. It'll also make it harder to stop, considering any patch you make can just be shot out immediately since there's no water protection. The removal of dispensers makes the maneuverability of TNT a lot more difficult, so things like left shooting and mid-air stacking won't really be an issue. Mid-air stacking really isn't a problem to begin with because there'll be no hybriding in this model. And for all the redstone gurus out there and the cannoneers that have been innovating cannon technology throughout the years, this will create sort of a new frontier using old technology, especially because there hasn't been a lot of dispenserless cannon tech being used. There will be a new sort of final frontier that will allow a new innovation in cannon technology to better fit this model. With TNT being less maneuverable, bases will be less susceptible to being completely shot out because you won't be able to move TNT around the base, up and down the base, left and right of the base, so your gear will be more safe as opposed to the older model where you can get through an entire base using one cannon. Of course, with no water protection, you'd have to make TNT only do damage to blocks inside enemy faction territory, so players can shoot cannons without needing water to prevent them from blowing up. This can also help reduce the damage done by insiding, since players cannot do damage with TNT inside their own land. For Factions Nostalgia, I'm proposing that factions be limited to 20 players with 20 power per player, making a full faction have a total of 400 chunks of claimable land. I also suggest removing F-access, and only allowing 2 truces per faction, as this will significantly hinder the ability for factions to create mega-factions, since no player outside your actual faction can enter the blocks within your claimed land. Factions Nostalgia should have a 10-chunk claim limit, as it makes up for the limitations of TNT travel distances caused by the lack of dispensers, while providing a good buffer of safety. I also feel that alt-buffer factions should be allowed to make sure factions have enough room and safety to make large, beautiful, intricate, and effective bases. In an attempt to give PvP a bit more weight on the server, because right now it's just kind of used as a way to pass time, as well as turn it into a tool to be used to potentially raid factions, having a player lose 8 power every death makes dying have much more of a greater significance, since one death could account for up to 2% of your faction's power if you have a full faction. Stringing together 4 or 5 kills in a row on a defending faction could allow for a faction on the offensive to overclaim a base, adding additional depth to raiding. The limit of 2 truces also reduces the amount of non-PvPable factions a player can have, making fights a lot more common. Dying in Warzone wouldn't incur the -8 faction power penalty. I figured the map size should be around 6,000 by 6,000 blocks, with the 4 chunks adjacent to the world border being unclaimable, as to not allow for corner bases. This is plenty of room for several large, fully claimed bases, while still being a small enough size to find these bases, considering they will be all middle map bases. This server is designed to be a lot simpler than current faction servers by not having such an insane learning curve in order to be good at the game. The major issue plaguing factions as a whole right now is the undeniable fact that there are more players leaving the game mode than are joining the game mode. This type of server is meant to be a pick-up-and-play type server, where you don't need to have played the game for 4 years and have a degree in ballistics engineering in order to be successful. The removal of dispensers makes cannons a lot simpler, and the removal of water protection makes sand walls the only real viable base defense for larger bases. Having less total complexity allows for players to kind of jump in and experience the game mode in its rawest form, while still finding ways to innovate and become better in the long term. Those who put in the time and the effort will be more successful, however the time and knowledge required to be successful will be drastically reduced. The faction's nostalgia economy should be set to where making money is much more difficult to do. Because of the buff to rating with the removal of water protection, TNT should be much more difficult to obtain. This can be done by removing creeper spawners so factions cannot gain vast amounts of TNT quickly, and making TNT somewhat expensive to buy in the shop, as this will be the only way to obtain TNT in bulk. Factions will need to save up money together to buy the TNT necessary to raid, or several smaller factions will save up to buy the TNT necessary to raid one large faction. With this being the case, I think the best way to gain money is by making items that need to be hand-farmed, sugarcane, tobacco, wheat, netherwort, blades rods, etc., be worth the most in the shop. This will make it so factions who take the time to grind will be able to obtain TNT faster as opposed to a faction that AFKs their crops. Of course, AFKable crops and spawner drops will sell for a decent price, however crops farmed by hand will sell for much more. In order to further limit low-effort money-making, I suggest making AFK machines illegal and to add an AFK kick timer of 15 minutes, as well as banning console client AFK relogging. As sand walls will become the main method of defense for larger bases, removing the option to buy sand in the shop is a good way to force factions to work for their sand walls. Because there is no water protection, creeper eggs, if not regulated, would be completely OP. I think that limiting the amount of creeper eggs being brought into the game and limiting what creeper eggs are able to destroy to things like spawners, chests, hoppers, and beacons would allow them to be usable whilst not being super overpowered. Even then, however, I think creeper eggs should be extremely rare, like only available in one-time use kits in the high-tier donor ranks kind of rare. Because PvP is supposed to have a greater importance in the faction's nostalgia model, MCMMO should not be given out in donor kits since it can be a major game changer. MCMMO should still be in the game, however, just make it so MCMMO XP will only be obtained when fighting other players. This rewards players who PvP frequently and promotes PvP since you can't upgrade your stats unless you fight other players. God apples should also not be given out in the daily kits. They should need to be handcrafted to be used. This will give zombie pigment spawners a greater value, and further increasing overall base values as a result as well, since the gold nuggets can be used for gold apple production. Since god apples will almost undoubtedly be more rare, you could even reduce the god apple cooldown to around 2 to 3 minutes. Since the stacked pot villagers are so popular and have been a part of Vortex since the beginning of the server, I say Factions Nostalgia should have them too, albeit in a more limited role. Have only stacked drinkable buffs, strength, speed, regeneration, and fire resistance, no splash potions, and bring back the stacked splash debuffs, poison, weakness, slowness, and instant damage. I have fond memories of trolling people with those stacked splash potions. Yes, they could be considered unfair if you're looking for a competitive PvP environment, however Nostalgia should be more about fun than competition, and you can have a lot of laughs trolling people with these. So witch spawners are currently useless, and I think it would be beneficial to the server as a whole if we made them useful. Have witch spawners drop single splash potions of a higher than vanilla potency. Health 3, Strength 3, Speed 3, Regeneration 3, Fire Resistance for 15 minutes, etc. This will add a new, valuable spawner for factions to use, while at the same time adding a new and unique feature to the server that, to my knowledge, has not been seen on any other server. The addition of the high potency potions will create a real strategic depth to PvP, making players decide between loading up on vanilla stacked potions, allowing room for additional sets of armor, or using the above potency potions, which could take up more inventory space. As it stands currently, donors are extremely overpowered at the start of each new factions map. The way the Factions Nostalgia model is supposed to work is by making the players who put in the most work the ones who become the most successful, not the ones who pay the most. I've gone ahead and restructured the donor kits to be more PvP-centric and way less pay-to-win. With this model, the donor kits are more of a benefit and less so a necessity. The kit cooldowns have been reduced to 24 hours to promote more active PvP. In a nod to the roots of the server, and as a nod to the hardcore OP Factions community, I think bringing back above vanilla gear, sharp 6 and 7s, protection 5, 6, and 7 armor, etc., in a once per map kit, would be a cool and unique addition, as it allows donators to have above vanilla gear while not making them extremely overpowered. By limiting the daily use kits to standard vanilla protection 4 and breaking 3, it allows non-donors the chance to kill and obtain above vanilla gear as a sort of trophy system for bragging rights. No spawners, obsidian, MCMMO credits, TNT, etc. will be given out in the kits in an effort to not make them pay to win. To get a full breakdown of what I envision in these kits, head over to the forums and take a look at the thread, and you can find all the info you need. So this may just be a personal thing, but I think removing unclaimed vaults will be a good thing for the server. How can this be done? Simple. Make sitting a home only be allowed within a faction's claimed land. This will force players to store their gear in a physical base, which will mean any base you come across could become potentially more valuable. More bases equals more bases to raid, which equals more items to loot, which equals more items to defend, which equals more PvP, which equals more ways to have fun. I think there should be more server-sanctioned events to boost player interest on the server. Events like 1v1, 3v3, and 5v5 tournaments with unique prizes, such as Sharpness and Protection 8s, are an option, along with a staff first player event, in which staff members use a Vortex rank once per map kit level gear, and some custom gear, and upon death, drop said gear for the players to fight for and potentially keep. I also think some competitions like a base design contest on the forums, voted on by the players and staff, would be a good idea just to spice things up a little bit. So that is the Factions Nostalgia proposal video. I highly recommend that you head over to the VortexPVP forums and look at the original post. I will link it in the description below. There you can see the original proposal all in text form. I think I condensed the contents a little bit for this video just for the sake of brevity, so please go there to see everything that I included. Also be sure to join the forums and comment on the thread with your ideas, your suggestions, your criticisms, or just your general overall thoughts on the proposal. You can also do that in the comments section below on this video. If you really liked this idea and this proposal, please talk about it, share it with your friends, get an excitement going about it, because I do think this is a really cool idea, and the only way that I can convince people to actually do this is to show that there is indeed a player interest. So if you are interested in it at all, please get other people involved and watch and spread the word about this. Thank you very much for watching. Catch you later.